Thank you for choosing the beautiful Cedar Poly greenhouse from Yardistry. We're confident you'll find the assembly process straightforward as long as you work through each step in the assembly manual. In addition, this Helpful Hints video offers tips and tricks we've learned along the way for handling some of the more critical steps. Step 1. Inventory. Before beginning assembly, sort your inventory by laying out each of the wood parts and hardware on the ground. Then, using the stamps or marked reference numbers, take a few minutes to cross-reference each part with the list in the assembly manual. Remember, we're always here to help. Contact us if you find a part that is damaged or missing. Take a moment to record the carton ID stamp for each box that you receive. There is a space on page 15 of your instruction manual to write down the first 5 digits that come before 14459 and also the letter at the end. Front wall panel. On a flat, solid, and raised surface, place a front base so the holes are towards the top. Next, position a right and left post so the angled edges face away from each other, and the grooves face inwards and towards the bottom. You will know when you have the boards in the correct position when the grooves facing inwards are slightly more towards the top of each post. Once the posts are in the correct position, make sure they are flush to the end of the front base and attach with wood screws. Slide an FB panel with the flat side facing down the right post until it sits tight to the front base and flush with the bottom of the cutout. Repeat this for the other side. Next, with the grooves facing towards the sides of the right door post, slide it down the groove in the FB panel so that the bottom sits tight to the cutout in the front base. Make sure the FB panel aligns with the bottom of the cutout in the door post. Repeat this for the left door post. Once the door posts are in the correct position and the grooves align, attach with wood screws. Next, place the front wall sill tight to the top of each panel, making sure that the notches fit around each door post. We have included 2 guide spacers with your unit to help you line up the grooves on all parts before attaching with wood screws. Making sure the grooves are aligned is critical for when you go to install your polycarbonate panels. Place the guide spacer in the groove of a post and the front sill to make sure they are properly aligned, then attach with wood screws and remove the guide spacers. Before continuing with your assembly, you need to prepare your polycarbonate panels. As explained on page 16 of your manual, it is very important to note that the polycarbonate panels in your unit have a UV coating on one side only. It is critical when installing these panels that the UV side is facing the outside of your greenhouse. Each polycarbonate panel comes with film on both sides. The side of the panel that has the printing on the film is the side with the UV coating. You will also note that there is a small notch cut on one corner of each polycarbonate panel. When installing these panels, it is critical that the notch is to the right side of the panel when facing the unit from outside the assembly. Remove the film on both sides from one left FB side panel and one right FB side. You will need to apply the top and bottom tape to each panel before continuing. The top tape is the smaller roll and is solid in color. It will look like this. The bottom tape is the larger roll and has a white pattern on it. It looks like this. When applying the tape to your panels, you want to make sure the tape is cut approximately 2 inches longer than the width of the panel so they can wrap around the edges of the panel. To apply the top tape, remove the backing and center it over the panel. Fold the tape up each edge and gently press along the edges to seal it in place. Repeat to install the bottom tape on each panel. You may find it helpful to reference pages 17 in your manual for this part of the assembly. Once your panels have the film removed and the tape applied, have a helper help guide the right FB side panel down the grooves of the right post and the right door post. Make sure the notch in the panel is on the right hand side when standing on the outside of the unit. It can be helpful to have someone push up from the bottom of the panel to help slide it into the groove on the front wall sill. Repeat these steps to install the left FB side panel. Place a front gable beam so the notches align with the left and right door posts and the groove is more towards the front of the assembly. You may need someone to help fit the door posts into the notches. Once everything is in place, attach with wood screws. Next, center an upright inside on the front gable beam. Have a helper make sure it sits flush to the bottom of the front gable beam and that it doesn't overhang the groove, then attach with a wood screw. Next, place a guide spacer on each edge in the groove. Center an upright outside on the front gable beam. Attach with a wood screw, then remove the guide spacer. Before continuing the assembly, you will need to prepare your gable panel. Once again, referencing pages 16 and 17 of your manual will be helpful for this part of the assembly. It is important to note that for the gable panel, you do not need to measure 2 inches longer than the length of the panel for either of the top or bottom tape. You only want the bottom tape to cover the notch. Once the panel has the film removed and the tape applied correctly, slide the gable panel with the UV side facing out between the uprights and into the front gable beam. When installing the right and left roof rafters, make sure the grooves are to the bottom and inside of the assembly. Slide the roof rafters all the way up each side of the gable panel. Make sure that each rafter overhangs the assembly by 1.5 inches. Then install one wood screw in the right and left post only. Next, place the peak spacer with the detail facing out between the roof rafters. If the peak spacer doesn't fit easily between the rafters, gently pull up on both rafters until it slides in and sits on top of the uprights. The next part is critical to set the space between the door posts and the door panel. Measure from the outside edge of the left post to the outer edge of the left door post. The measurement should be 23 7/8 inches. If you don't get the right measurement, have someone gently push outwards on both the door post and the left post until you reach 23 7/8 inches. Once the correct measurement is met, attach the rafter to the assembly with a wood screw. Repeat this process for the other side. Next, attach a peak spacer to the assembly with wood screws. Before moving on, place your door panel inside the door opening in the panel. If the door panel does not fit, go back and check to make sure that each rafter overhangs the assembly by 1.5 inches, and the distance from the outside of each post to the outside of each door post is 23 7/8 inches. It's also important to make sure that the distance from the outside of the right and left posts is the same at the top and bottom of the assembly. Back wall assembly. On a flat, solid, and raised surface, place a back base so the holes are towards the top. Next, position a right and left post so the angled edges face away from each other, and the grooves face inwards and towards the bottom. You will know you have the boards in the correct position when the grooves facing inwards are slightly more towards the top of each post. Once the posts are in the correct position, make sure they are flush to the end of the back base and attach with wood screws. Slide an FB panel with the flat side facing down, all the way down the left post until it sits tight to the back base. Make sure that the top of the FB panel sits flush to the bottom of the cutout in the left post. Repeat this for the other side. Next, with the grooves facing towards the sides on the back post, slide one down each FB panel so the bottom sits tight in the cutout in the back base. You will know that the back posts have been installed correctly when the top of the FB panel sits tight to the bottom of the cutout. Once the back post is in the correct position and the grooves align, attach with wood screws. When installing the vent wall panel, make sure that the vent is towards the bottom of the panel and faces outwards. Once the panel is in place, you will want to make sure it sits tight to the back base and flush to the bottom of the cutouts on each back post. Next, Place the back wall sill tight to the top of each panel, making sure the notches fit around each back post. Place the guide spacer in the groove of a post and the back sill to make sure the grooves are properly aligned. If the grooves do not align, double check that the top of the FB panels and vent panel align with the bottom of the cutout on each post. Once all grooves are aligned, attach with wood screws and remove the guide spacers. Remove the film on both sides from one left FB side panel, one right FB side panel, and one back center panel. Next, you'll need to apply the top and bottom tape to each panel before continuing. You may find it helpful to reference pages 16 and 17 in your manual to complete this part of the assembly. Once your panels have the film removed and the tape applied, have a helper help guide the back center panel down the grooves of each back post and into the groove of the back wall sill. Make sure that the notch is to the bottom right hand side if standing on the outside of the unit. You may need to have someone push up on the back center panel from below to help fit it into the groove on the back wall sill. Next, install a right FB side panel and a left FB side panel in the same manner. Once again, making sure that the notch is to the bottom right hand side of the panel as outlined on page 33 in your manual. Again, you may need someone to push up from the bottom of the panel to guide the panel into the groove on the back wall sill. Continuing on a flat, solid and raised surface, place the back gable beam down so the groove is more towards the top. Next, centered on the back gable beam, place an upright inside. Place a guide spacer in the groove of the back gable beam and on top of the upright inside like shown here. Then place an upright outside. Before attaching with wood screws, make sure both uprights are flush to the back gable beam. Once the boards are attached, remove the guide spacers. Next, place the back gable beam on top of the back posts so the upright outside is facing outwards. The posts fit into the notches and the grooves align with the polycarbonate panels, then attach with screws. Before continuing the assembly, you'll need to prepare your gable panel. Once again, referencing pages 16 and 17 of your manual will be helpful for this part of the assembly. It is important to note that for the gable panel, you do not need to measure 2 inches longer than the length of the panel for either the top or the bottom tape. You only want the bottom tape to cover the notch. Once the panel has the film removed and the tape applied correctly, slide the gable panel with the UV side facing out down into the back gable beam. When installing the right and left roof rafters, make sure the grooves are to the bottom and inside of the assembly. It can be helpful to slide the roof rafters up the assembly so they sit on the upright inside. Place the peak spacer with the detail facing out. Then finish pushing up on the roof rafters until they are tight to the back of the peak spacer. Once the peak spacer is in place, make sure that each rafter overhangs the assembly by 1.5 inches. Then install one wood screw into the right and left post. Finish installing the remaining wood screws into the assembly, then check that the distance across the top and the bottom of the back panel is equal. If the panel is not square, double check that the rafters overhang each side of the assembly by 1.5 inches, and that all wood screws have been installed. Connecting wall assemblies. This part of the assembly should be carried out in the final location of your greenhouse. With a helper holding the back wall in place, bring in a side wall assembly and slide it into the grooves of either the left or right post. Make sure the side wall assembly is flush to the post, and that the top of the assembly is flush with the bottom of the cutout. Pre-drill, then attach with wood screws. Repeat this process for the other side wall assembly. Next, place the front wall assembly so that the side wall assemblies fit into the grooves and sit flush to the side of the assembly. When in the correct position, pre-drill and attach with wood screws. Squaring your unit. Check to make sure all measurements on page 43 of your manual are met. Your unit should measure 9 feet 2 7/16 inches diagonally between posts. If the unit is not square, gently adjust the panels until you reach the correct measurement. Side wall panel assembly. With a helper, place a side wall top so the angle faces outwards, and the cutouts align with the mid post. Make sure the cutout is flush with the top of the mid post, then attach with wood screws. It is important to note that the screws on each end are installed at an angle. Repeat for the other side. Before continuing, reference pages 16 and 17 in your manual and prepare the sidewall polycarbonate panels. Remove the film from both sides and apply the top and bottom tape. For the sidewall panels, the holes in the panel will be towards the top and the notch will always be on the bottom right hand side when the UV coating surface is facing out. With the UV side of the panel facing out and the holes towards the top, place a sidewall panel into the grooves on the side wall sill first. Then slide it into the grooves on the posts. Repeat for all 4 sidewall panels. Next, take a short post assembly with the angled edge facing out and slide the grooves down each sidewall panel. You want to make sure that the dowel in the short post assembly is to the bottom and that it fits into the hole in the side wall sill. The top of the short post assembly should sit flush with the cutout in the side wall top. Once the short post assemblies are in the correct position, attach with wood screws. To install the last 4 side wall panels, start the top of the short post assembly and mid post and slide them each down into place. Once again, it is critical that the UV side of the polycarbonate panel is facing outwards and the notch is on the bottom right hand side when facing the unit from the outside of the assembly. Standing on the inside of the assembly, place a U-channel on the top of each sidewall panel. You will notice the U-channel has one side slightly shorter than the other. When placing it on the panel, have the short side to the inside of the assembly, like this. Next, through each hole in the sidewall panel, use an EPDM washer and black pan screw to attach the panels to the sidewall top. Vent roof peak assembly. This part of the assembly is best done on a surface that is raised, flat, and solid. Lay a vent roof peak down so that the pilot holes and groove are towards the top of the board. Place a middle roof rafter in the notches of the vent roof peak. You want to make sure the angled edge is tight to the vent roof peak, and the grooves are to the side of the board and towards the top. It can be helpful to place the bottom vent block between the 2 rafters at this point to make sure you achieve the correct spacing for the vent panel. Once the rafters are in the correct position, use the guide spacers to help align the grooves, attach with wood screws, then remove the guide spacers and the bottom vent block. Flip over the assembly and install the remaining wood screws on an angle. Turn the assembly over once more, then install the inside vent block on the inside of each middle roof rafter. Make sure they are flush to the top of the rafter and tight to the vent roof peak, then attach with wood screws. Next, position the bottom vent block tight to the top of the inside vent blocks with the grooves facing down. Before attaching with wood screws, make sure the grooves align using the guide spacers. Center the vent panel roof block on the vent roof panel so that the top of the board sits flush to the panel as shown here. Make sure the angle of the vent is to the top, then attach with wood screws. Place the continuous hinge on the vent panel so the middle is flush to the top of the panel. Fold the other side of the hinge downwards like this to ensure you have the correct positioning. Install 3 black pan screws into the vent roof panel to hold the hinge in place for now. Next, lay the vent roof panel on top of the vent roof peak assembly and attach the continuous hinge to the vent roof peak with 3 pan screws. You should be able to easily open and close the vent panel. If the vent panel won't open easily, you may need to adjust the vent roof panel block or the bottom vent block slightly. Once the panel can open and close easily, install the rest of the pan screws into the continuous hinge. Attaching roof assemblies. You will need 3 people and at least 1 ladder for this part of the assembly. Place a ladder in the center of your greenhouse and have someone remain in the center until the roof panel frames are in place. Have 2 people lift a vent roof peak assembly up over the side of the frame. You want to make sure that the middle rafters align with the notches in the side wall top and that the vent roof peak fits tight to the peak spacer right and left roof rafters. It can be helpful to have a second ladder positioned at the end of the greenhouse to help guide the roof assemblies into place. Have someone remain holding the assembly in place while you repeat this process with the roof peak assembly. Once again, the middle rafters should fit into the notches of the sidewall top, and the roof peak should set tight to the vent roof peak, peak spacer, and left and right roof rafters. Once the roof assemblies are in place, use the guide spacers to make sure all grooves align. Then attach through the peak spacer with wood screws. With the groove spacers still in place, make sure the roof assemblies are flush, then attach with wood screws and remove the spacers. Before continuing, make sure the top of the roof assemblies are clean and dry. You will need gloves and a cloth for this part of the assembly. Sealant should be applied in temperatures between 5 and 35 degrees Celsius or 41 and 95 degrees Fahrenheit. Please refer to page 6 in your manual for more information. Cut the tip off one of the sealant tubes provided with your unit, then attach the nozzle. Place the sealant into your caulking gun, then apply a small, continuous bead of sealant across the top of the roof assemblies, then smooth it out to ensure a tight seal. Use a cloth to wipe away any excess sealant. Before attaching the roof rafters to the assembly, make sure that each rafter overhangs the assembly by 3/4 of an inch. Once all rafters are in the correct position, attach with wood screws. Next, measure 19 and 9/16 inches from inside of the roof rafter and make a mark. Then align the outside edge of the vent roof rafter with the mark, making sure it is tight to the bottom of the vent block and fits in the notch of the sidewall top. The angled edge should be towards the top of the assembly and facing up. The angle on this part is necessary to allow the vent panel to open and close easily. Use the guide spacers to ensure that all grooves align, then attach with wood screws from inside the assembly. It can be helpful to have someone hold up the vent panel when installing the screws from the inside. On the outside of the assembly, the vent roof rafter should overhang the assembly by 3/4 of an inch. If it doesn't, have a helper push on the sidewall top from inside the assembly until the correct measurement is met, then attach with a wood screw. Installing roof panels. Before continuing the assembly, you will need to prepare the roof panels and small roof panels. Once again, referencing pages 16 and 17 of your manual will be helpful for this part of the assembly. Once the panel has the film removed and the tape applied correctly, you are ready to continue your assembly. Slide 4 roof panels up the rafters on the sidewall side of the assembly. Make sure the panels are positioned so that the notch is in the bottom right-hand corner when facing the unit from the outside, and the holes in each panel are towards the bottom. On the vent side wall, slide 2 roof panels and 2 small roof panels up along the grooves in each rafter. Once again, make sure the UV side of the panels are facing outwards and the holes in each panel are towards the bottom. It can be helpful to have somebody gently push up on the panel from the inside to help fit the panel into the groove at the top of the assembly. Next, on the bottom of each roof panel, place a PCU channel with the long edge on the bottom. To achieve the 1/8 inch gap between the panel and the U-channel, push the U-channel onto the panel so that it is snug, then gently pull back on it slightly. Next, attach a roof panel with EPDM washers and black pan screws. Apply sealant. Gloves are essential for this part of the assembly. It is important to make sure that all surfaces are clean and dry and that the sealant is being applied in ideal temperatures. Refer to page 6 of your manual for more information before applying the sealant to your greenhouse. Starting on the outside of your assembly, apply a small, continuous bead of silicone along 3 sides of each roof panel. You'll want to leave the bottom edge free of silicone for now. Smooth out the sealant as you go and use a cloth to wipe away any excess. Repeat this process for the inside of each roof panel. To help ensure a good seal, you can gently push on the panel as you apply the silicone. Next, from outside of the assembly, apply the silicone to the bottom and both sides of the polycarbonate panels in the front, back, and side wall assemblies. Leave the top edge free of silicone. It can be helpful to gently push on the panels while applying the sealant to get a tight seal. Smooth out the silicone as you go and wipe away any excess using a cloth. Also, on the outside of the assembly, apply an even, continuous bead of silicone to the bottom edge of each of the gable panels, smoothing the sealant as you go. Finally, before applying the sealant to the top edge of the PCU channel, make sure that you still have the 1/8 inch gap between the U-channel and the polycarbonate panel. Apply the silicone in a small, continuous bead, smooth it out as you go, and remove any excess with a cloth. Shelf assembly. The upper and lower shelves of your greenhouse can be installed on either the right or left side wall. The following assembly will show the shelves being installed on the right hand side. From inside the assembly, along the back wall of your greenhouse at each post location, measure 31 inches up from the top of the back wall sill and make a mark. Place a wooden gusset flush to either the right or left post and centered on the remaining posts. You want to make sure the top of each gusset aligns with the mark, then attach with wood screws. Repeat this process for the side wall assembly. Place 2 short upper shelves on the top of the gussets along the back wall. You will want to make sure they sit tight to the back wall and tight to each other. Then attach with wood screws at each end. Locate the center over each of the middle 2 gussets, then attach with wood screws. Next, tight to the end of the wooden gusset on the same side that you installed your sidewall gussets, attach a shelf block from underneath with wood screws. Place 2 long upper shelves on the wooden gussets along the side wall, making sure they sit tight to the side wall and the end of the boards with the pilot holes are tight to the front wall. The side tight to the shelf block should not have any pilot holes. Once the boards are in place, attach to the front wall with wood screws. Next, over the 3 middle gussets, find the center of each, then attach the long upper shelves with screws. Finally, attach the shelf block with wood screws from underneath the assembly. When attaching the shelf gussets, make sure they sit tight to the side wall sill and the posts before attaching with wood screws. Flush to the bottom of the side wall sill and tight to the back wall. Install the long shelf joist. Make sure the end of the long shelf joist is flush with the tip of the shelf gusset, then attach with wood screws. Take note that the screw attaching it to the back wall is installed at an angle. Repeat for the other side. Next, place a shelf front against each of the long shelf joists. It is important to make sure that the 4 holes in the board are on the same side that your side wall shelf will be installed on. For our purposes, the holes need to be on the right hand side of the assembly. have a helper hold the shelf front in place. Then place a top shelf on each long shelf joist like this. This will help you achieve the 5/8 inch spacing needed before attaching the shelf front. Make sure the top of the shelf front is flush to the top of the shelf top. Then attach with wood screws and remove the shelf top for now. To get the correct positioning of the shelf joist, once again, have a helper hold a shelf top flush to the top of the shelf front, then attach the shelf joist from inside the assembly with wood screws. When attaching the joist gusset assembly together, make sure the shelf joist and shelf gusset are flush and the corner bracket is flush with the end of the shelf joist. Next, place the assembly so that the shelf joist sits flush with the bottom of the notch in each back post. Then attach with screws. Lay a shelf top on top of the gusset assemblies and adjust it so it sits flush with the top of the shelf front. This will give you the proper 5/8 of an inch spacing. Attach the shelf joist to the front top with wood screws. Measure 5/8 of an inch down from the top of the shelf side and make a mark. Next, place a shelf joist so it aligns with both the mark and the notch on the shelf side. Then attach with wood screws. On the same side as your lower shelf, remove the corner bracket that attaches the side and front wall. Then, place the side shelf assembly so the notches sit tight to the side wall and the shelf joists face away from the front wall. Make sure it is level, then attach with wood screws. Next, place a shelf front against the shelf joists so that the 4 holes in the board are towards the back wall. Have a helper place a shelf top on the shelf joists, then adjust the shelf front so that it is level with the top shelf. When the board is in the correct position, attach with wood screws. Door assembly. When installing the door blocks and top door blocks, make sure they are flush to the inside edges and fit tight together before attaching with wood screws. Please note, the door can be hung from either the right or left side of your greenhouse. Place the door panel on a flat, solid, and raised surface with the lip of the panel facing up. If you plan to hang your door from the right-hand side, measure 3 inches down from the top and 3 inches up from the bottom of the door panel and make a mark. Place the top of the hinge at the mark closest to the top of the door and the bottom of the hinge at the mark at the bottom of the door. Center the third hinge on the door and attach with wood screws. Place a guide spacer flat on the right-hand side of the door and flat along the front base to help with proper positioning of the door panel. Once the door is in the correct spot, attach the hinges to the unit with wood screws. If you plan to hang your door from the left-hand side, measure 3 inches down from the top and 3 inches up from the bottom of the door panel and make a mark. Place the top of the hinge at the mark closest to the top of the door and the bottom of the hinge at the mark at the bottom of the door. Center the third hinge on the door and attach with wood screws. Place a guide spacer along the left-hand side of the door opening and flat along the front base to help with proper positioning of the door panel. Once the door is in the correct spot, attach the hinges to the unit with the wood screws. The door should be able to open and close easily. From inside the assembly, with the door open, place a closer block so the long side of the board is flush with the outer edge of the door block. A good way to tell that you have this piece on correctly is by looking at the wood grain on the end of the board. In the correct position, this end of the board will be flush with the outer edge of the door block and the bottom of the arc should sit flush with the bottom of the gable beam. Once the board is in the correct position, attach with wood screws. Next, measure 1 inch down from the top door block and 1/2 inch from the edge of the closer block and make a mark. The top of the bottom 2 bracket should sit at the 1 inch mark and the inside edge should sit at the 1/2 inch mark. Pre-drill the holes, then attach the bracket with black pan screws. Slide the 130-degree bracket onto the tube and attach it to the bottom tube bracket with a short dowel and rubber cap. Using a long dowel, attach the tube to the top tube bracket and secure with a rubber cap. Close the door, make sure the tube is level, then attach the top tube bracket to the door panel with black pan screws. Open the door and measure 8 inches in from the door block and make a mark. Centered on the top door block, pre-drill a hole at the 8-inch mark. Then place a pan screw through the end link of the chain. Install the pan screw into the pre-drilled hole, taking care not to tighten the screw. You want the chain to be able to move easily. Finally, measure 5 inches from the end of the door panel and make a mark. Place the end of the chain bracket at the mark, then attach with pan screws.